Alright, so this is my disclaimer for this video. I'm going to be going over the free online Fate called Cold-Blooded. That's right available on Square Enix's website. If you are planning on playing in this and your Game Master or Crystal Bear, as we call them on this channel, come to you and say that, hey, we're going to be playing this free thing online, don't be that guy. Turn off this video. Don't watch this. Go play your game, then come back and watch this video, and then be like, oh my gosh, you know, the way Coleman did it was so much more awesome than my GM. No, I'm just kidding. Probably won't say that. But a lot of spoilers, and I think that this adventure is really best to be had kind of without any knowing of anything that you're getting into. So that's it. That's my disclaimer. Turn it off if you're playing. If not, keep watching because it's good content. Welcome back to Limit Break 20. In today's video, we're going to be going over an entirely free adventure that is available for you to play on Square Enix's website. The content that we're going to be mainly focused on today is going to be the Cold-Blooded Fate that was released a couple months ago. Now, one of the things that was really interesting after being one of the first people to get the starter's guide, as in like the first wave, like there was nothing special about me, was that I went through the book and the materials, and then they released all of the free rules and the character sheets online. And other than having level 40 or 50 character sheets that you would have available if you went through the starter guide, they just gave you level 30 ones, which honestly are more than enough to get started and have some fun. Especially if you've been playing tabletop RPGs remotely. In my opinion, the resources that are available for free through PDFs online are hands down the way to go. So let's dive right into what this is. So the Fate Cold-Blooded is really just a standalone, think of it as a combat encounter. It's fairly bare bones, and I'll actually go ahead and read the scenario overview to you so you get a flavor for what's going on here. A terrible monster known as Vodyanoi, I think that's how you pronounce it, living in the pools beneath the unholy here, has been seen dragging his victims into the water where he lays upon them until they asphyxiate. One would think that the wave can then eat his prey, but such is not the case, as the corpses are left to drift in the pools until they are consumed by jackals and carrion crows. Could it be that this Vodyanoi kills merely for pleasure? Now, if you read that, that's kind of a weak setup, which if you played anything in the starter guide, most of those setups are fairly weak as far as it goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this better. So the first thing we're going to do is actually start the adventure. And one of the ways that I start adventures, especially if I'm playing with people for the first time, or I'm running, like I said, a Roll20 session, is I like to make it so that we don't just start in a tavern, because I feel like that's pretty basic, but also that can kind of lead to things being more open-ended. And if you are an inexperienced game master, or you don't have, you know, the full rule set, which no one does right now, it could be something that's difficult to navigate because people might want to go and do different things. So one of the things that I almost always do is I will start an adventure sort of mid-aetheryte teleportation stream. So what I'm doing is I'm describing what the players are feeling and experiencing as they make their way to the destination. Now, for this fate, it takes place in central Thanalan, and really the best place for this to start is traveling through the aetheryte at Blackbreast Station. And so what I would do is I set this up as they come through, I usually will have someone roll a d20 or make a vitality check to see who maybe got sick and threw up last night's ale or something like that. Just kind of have some fun, get some dice rolling early. But then once they get into Blackbrush Station, they are then approached by a Brass Blades captain. And what he then tells them is that you must be the free company that is sent here to investigate the missing people, right? And I would maybe not necessarily read that initial scenario guide. I would maybe kind of have this as people have gone missing and their bodies have been turning up sort of in random creeks and streams around the area. And once we'd have that established, what I would do is I would then have the captain take you to sort of the local tavern there called the Coffer and Coffin. Now, once you're at the Coffer and Coffin, what I would do is have the Brass Blades captain introduce you to sort of the main barkeep or the owner there. and maybe have him take you down to a cellar where the most recent victim's body sort of lays. May not be the most sanitary thing for the patrons, but it's kind of on the down low. So, what I would then do, and this is sort of how I've run this scenario before, is I would have something sort of be off about the body. So, what I specifically did is I had the bodies that showed up, their eyes were missing. And so that kind of creates a little bit of mystery, gets the players kind of guessing a little bit, and they can ask some questions, and you can kind of maybe make up some things about what's been happening, how the character died, and whatnot. So have a little bit of role play there, and then as you resurface from the tavern, this is where, again, if you say, well, what do you guys want to do now? They're going to, go off in 16 different directions. But this is where you can sort of create the sense of urgency and get a ticking clock going, which I think is probably the best way to run some of these one-off scenarios. Have some objective or something that feels sort of pressed for time for the adventurers. So I would then introduce a second NPC, or at this point, it's a third NPC. Maybe, I used a young teenage boy and who had mentioned that his brother had been taken by a toxic toad and that he needs some help. And basically, he'd then kind of guide you to where this scenario would take place. So, as far as setup goes, I feel like that's sort of the best way to create an adventure where you're going someplace. There's a little bit of investigation, but at the same time, what you're doing is still keeping the players on track for the adventure. So now, what I want to do is jump into sort of the information that's included inside the Fate. We'll go over sort of the enemy cards and get some of that information going, as well as how to maybe build this on a battle map. And I'll also put this on a battle map as well, so that way you guys can see some different things and how to run this. And then finally, one of the last things I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about one specific rule that Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG has that can actually turn this combat encounter, turn the difficulty and sort of the challenge up to, I wouldn't say 11, but closer to like a 9 or a 10. It makes it a little bit fun. So let's dive into it. So the first thing we want to go over about the encounter is the victory conditions. So this adventure is completed when the Vodyanoi is dropped to 0 HP. Now, when it comes to this encounter, there are player step and enemy step, and if you have questions about that, you can look at one of my other videos. I've covered this, not quite ad nauseum, but pretty close. So when it's the enemy's turn, what the turn order is going to be is the Vodyanoi, and then followed by the Toxic Toad. But the other thing I'll show you is the number of enemies that they'll be encountering. So when the players first enter the combat area, there's going to be 3 enemies, 2 Toxic Toads and the Vodyanoi. So what you'll notice is this little grayed out figure is another Toxic Toad that shows up during the second phase. And one of the things that's unique about Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG is that combat sometimes have narrative shifts called phases. At least I would think of them as narrative shifts where the monster gets bigger, stronger, something happens, and that's something that is going to be experienced here in this adventure. So when we go to phase 2, the key for the transition there is when the Vodyanoi has been reduced to 60 health points or less. And then it's at the end of the enemy's turn. So let's say then players do some damage to it, drops the Vodyanoi down by just less than 60. The enemy step's going to happen. Everyone's going to take their turn, and then phase 2 starts. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go over the stat block for the Toxic Toad. So as you can see, they have a defense of 13, magical defense of 12, and their HP 60. Now, their combo ability is that they either use Sticky Tongue or Lap. And then what they do is they use Labored Leap. So if the toad is close enough to hit an enemy with Lap, you go ahead and use that, or move them to the character that they're closest to use that. If they're not, you can use Sticky Tongue, which will then pull them. So let's take a look at that. So Sticky Tongue targets an enemy. It's got a range of 5 squares. Its base effect is it deals 2 damage to the target and forces them to move to the closest empty square next to this enemy, if one's available. And then on a direct hit, it deals an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So again, this is kind of a, like a ranged pull. Think of it that way. Maybe like a scorpions get over here, but in toad form. So next is going to be Lap, and this is just going to be a range of 1 square, targets the enemy's defense, and its base effect is it deals 4 damage. But what it does is deals an additional 1d6 damage on a direct hit. So the difference between these two is the Sticky Tongue's got the pull with a smaller base damage. The Lap's going to be a harder hitting ability. So, and then finally, the combo ability, which is sort of the big one for this encounter, is Labored Leap. So uh, all squares occupied by this character. So that's the origin. So it's going to be a 4x4 area that is centered on this character. And we'll actually go over that range and what that means. And it targets all enemies within the marker. And the trigger is the beginning of the character's next turn. And if a character or a player character is inside this range attack, they're going to take 2d6 damage. So that's sort of a big deal. Um, Now we'll move on to the second character slot, which is the Vodyanoi. So the first character is considered large, so it's a 2x2 square is what they take up. The Vodyanoi takes up a 3x3 space, so it's pretty solid, pretty big. Its defense is 14, magical defense is 13, and it has 128 hit points. During phase 2, this character's abilities are going to be dealing an extra 1d6 damage, and so you want to just make sure you let the characters know that that's going to be happening when the phase starts. So what's a little bit different is that the Vodyanoi is going to be, their combo ability is they get to use Sticky Tongue, then they're going to hit with Lap, and then they're going to use Labored Leap. So they basically get to use all 3 abilities, whereas the Toxic Toad for Sticky Tongue and Lap, it's either or. With the exception of Labored Leap. So if the Vodyanoi hits a player character with Labored Leap, they're just taking 3d6 damage and an additional 1d6 if they're enraged. So the nice thing is that mechanically they're all going to operate the same. This one's just bigger, does a little more damage. So after I finished recording this video, I realized that this was going to be way too long to have it in just one video. So I am going to be breaking this up into 2 parts. So you've just finished part 1. Stay tuned, and I will have part 2 available probably within the next week or 2. So until then, stay safe, adventurers. And if you did like this content, feel free to attune to this channel by liking and subscribing.